Hello and welcome. You find yourself checking out the Vortex StrikeEagle 5-25 by 56. This is in mils and features the EBR-7c first focal plane reticle. This was graciously lent to me by my good friend Noah. So Noah, thank you very much. While I had this off of his Precision 457, he had my Razer HD Gen II, which he was kind of reluctant to give up. The 7C reticle is very nice, features a very fine center dot and very legible, easy to read holds, which is perfect for what he does, which is shoot this thing on a rimfire out to 300 plus yards. It makes holding over extremely easy. The illumination on this thing isn't bad whatsoever, especially for an HPVO. The nice thing is, if you need it, it's there. Unlike this thing's little brother, the Venom. With the lights off, you can clearly see that the illumination is nice, sharp, and clear. It does have a steep drop-off after a certain point, but you know what? It's still going to be bright enough when you need it for most cases. Just like with the illumination, the turrets on this thing aren't half bad. They feature a zero stop and are locking. There is a little bit of mush, but ultimately, they're easy to pick up and get the job done. The side focus is roughly around 40-45 yards, which is exactly where we are right now. Illumination on this thing is okay-ish. It looks like the reticle lines up okay-ish to the target. We're probably about across, what is that, about 7 mils, the bottom, 8 mils, the very, very bottom. We're about 1/10 of a mil off, and that's not the first time I've seen that. One of my Razer HDs did the exact same thing. Anyway, let's see if it'll at least track halfway well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So across 4 and 4, it looks like we have about 1/10 of a mil, maybe a little bit less of a jump. It's not terrible. It looked like we saw that around 2 mils anyway. Windage, of course, returns to 0 perfectly well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So across 10 mils of added elevation, you can see we are right on that 1/10 of a mil discrepancy, which on the turrets is usually fine, but you can also see, again, that the reticle does not 100% line up with the target, whereas with the Venom, it did perfectly. So, what does this tell me? It tells me it's slightly off in some regard, but ultimately, if you're dialing for it, it's not terrible, and it returns to 0 just fine. And going to 0, and then adding 10 mils of elevation. Within 1 or 2% of the tracking test, I'm quite pleased. And this thing, again, was middle of the road, just sort of like the illumination, which, as you can clearly see here on this overcast day, is not visible. If you're not paying attention, we're already starting to see a slight trend with this. But now let's talk about image quality, shall we? At 30 yards here at 5x, we are greeted with a fairly good looking image. The overcast day is going to mute a lot of the colors and actually make this thing work for its money. As we slowly increase the magnification to full, you'll see at around the 15x mark, we do have a little bit of shadows coming in and a touch of barrel distortion. However, to the naked eye, you won't really pick that up. As I dial in the side focus, we have a very nice looking image with a touch of purple fringing or chromatic aberration peeking up on those high contrast areas. The overcast weather is only going to help emphasize that. Even if we had top tier glass, we still might see a little bit of chromatic aberration coming up on the high contrast areas. Focusing on the flag, we could count every star and read the Made in USA very easily. As we turn our attention to our 400-yard brick building, you can easily see the amount of haze that's in the air. So yeah, the image quality might not be as perfect as we would like, but it's a good test to see if it can look past a lot of that. I adjust the side focus to about 350 meters, which is just where it needs to be for that brick building. So, as we slowly increase the magnification, will the side focus actually line up? I stopped briefly here at 10x, which is the start of where the shadows start to creep in, and it doesn't really go away till about here, which is just past 15x. The image, however, still looks very good as we take it up to about 20x. However, once we take it up to its maximum of 25 right here, you'll see that it softens up a little bit. Happily, however, I adjust the side focus ever so slightly to get the image to look very good. I only say very good because, again, we still see a lot of the haze in the air, and it mutes the image down quite a bit. As far as our depth of field here, that tree to the far left at 9 o'clock is around 250 or so yards. Our brick building is right around 400 yards, and the trees off in the distance behind that are around 600 to 700 yards. So you can clearly see that the depth of field on this thing can get fairly shallow when we're up here at 25x. However, up to 20x, it seemed to be very open and wide. If I had to make any criticisms about the image, I would say it's lacking a touch of contrast, but again, the overcast day is really wreaking havoc on this thing, and it would so with basically any optic. Pushing ourselves even farther back to about 800 yards, a quick snap zoom up to 25x shows that we have a little bit of chromatic aberration and a lot of purple fringing on those 30-yard power lines. Once we go past that, we do start to see a little bit of yellow or green tinting to the glass as well, which is not uncommon in a lot of European optics, not really so much on the Chinese market. Usually we see a lot of purple and that's about it, but this does creep through with a little bit of yellowish green. With a quick twist of your left thumb and pointer finger, you can get almost anything in focus rather quickly. I had no problems with this thing as far as hunting for focus. It was very easy to get on target and get everything right where I wanted it. Let's now move our focus to about 1,000 yards. It's still a very overcast day, which means the colors are going to be a little bit muted. The contrast isn't going to be as apparent, and the shadows aren't going to be as deep. With that being said, we have a very usable image. We can make out some of those smaller dead tree branches up at the top of those trees. You can make out many of the shingles that are on that roof, and even some of the partitions in the window panes. It wouldn't only be easy enough to spot a full-size IPSC target at 1,000 yards, but maybe even be able to spot your own hits or misses on that said target. I back out the magnification before I increase the elevation up by 10 mils. I do this because if you're actually shooting out at this distance, you're going to be adding elevation no matter what caliber you're shooting. With an added 10 mils, the image does look a little bit different, but the sun also just started to creep out, which is going to change the color tones a little bit. It also is going to change the shadows. But if we're looking at some key sort of points, aka that window, those trees, and the shingles on top, you'll see that the image is slightly different, but not totally unusable. There was a slight shift to the Eyebox. Adjusting that did bring it up a little bit better, but ultimately, if you're dialing up for 10 mils at any sort of distance, just take solace knowing that the image isn't going to really turn to shit. So, this being a 34mm tube and a 56mm front objective and only a 5x multiplier, this thing should let in a lot of light in lower environments, right? Well, you could already see that the shadows around 10 to 15 creep up a lot, and at 25 the image gets significantly darker. The illumination, however, is absolutely beautiful. It is very sharp, clear, and even. The steps on it are pretty broad, so as you go from its maximum to its minimum, you are going to have a fairly large step. But as you can clearly see, even here, you can find the right brightness setting for what you might need. Getting ready to slowly pull back the illumination, just pay attention to the overall brightness of the image. It brightens up significantly from 25 to about 20. Then we have that shadow that creeps in from 10 to 15, or in this case 15 to 10. It is something to note. The low light performance on this could be better. Ah, my home away from home, as well as Noah's home away from home. Every single time I go to the range, he's always there, stalking me, mocking me, trying to make me a better shooter. Could you imagine that? Having a range partner where you actually go there and you're always trying to outdo one another so you both get better? It's silly, I say, absolutely friggin' silly. We start here at 5x, focusing our attention on F-class targets set up at 50 yards. Every few seconds, I'm going to increase it in 5x increments up to 25. So, from 5, we're going to slowly bring it up to 10. And that's again where we saw the shadowing and the slight barrel distortion come into effect earlier. Again, to the naked eye, a more, how should I say, dynamic cheek weld, you're not going to notice it as much as my full rigid setup. Cresting to 15x, you can see that we're basically out of all the distortion and the shadows, and we are left with a very good looking image. I wanted to really dwell on the in-between magnifications just for a little bit to have you guys understand that just because you have a 5 to 25 doesn't mean that you have to leave it at either 5 or 25. You could use it in the middle. Here, we have a very, very good looking image that, you know what, is more than practical in most environments. Trying to make a hit on a man-sized target, this should be good to about 1,500 yards at 15x. Bring it up to its maximum, though, you can see that we do have some of that purple fringing coming out like we saw earlier. High contrast areas, even with the sun starting to peek past all these intermittent clouds, it is something that's going to be apparent sometimes. If you're like me and you don't like any sort of purple fringing or chromatic aberration, you might have to look elsewhere because it does make itself very apparent most of the time. However, it's usually above 20x. On to the all-important Eyebox test. And any HPVO, I don't care what it is going to be limited simply just by how much magnification they're usually pumping through these things. Despite the fact that it has a 34mm main tube and a 56mm front objective, it doesn't matter if it has the Chinese glass that it has or the best Scotch glass in the planet, it's still going to have a fairly tight eyebox. And as we slowly increase the magnification, it's going to be more and more apparent. The best bet for you if you're looking to run more magnification through any of your setups, but you still want to try to get on target fast, is very simple and easy. You just have to run an offset little micro red dot or micro reflex, like a pistol sight. Run one of those off with a 50, 100 yard zero, just to at least give you a better line of sight for when you get behind the gun. Alrighty then, let's continue on with some comparisons. On the left is going to be the StrikeEagle 5-25. On the right, we're starting out with the Arken SH4 Gen II 6-24. Now, despite the fact there's only 1x between them, the 6-24 Arken looks like it's zoomed in significantly more than the StrikeEagle. However, besides that little discrepancy in overall image size, once we start taking up to their maximum magnifications and really start to dial in the side focus, it's going to be really hard to tell these two apart. If it looks like I filmed these on the exact same day, you'd be absolutely right. I did film these on the exact same day, primarily because I needed something to compare directly to the StrikeEagle and the Venom that was going to be right up their price point. Or at least, so it was. You can now get this SH4 on sale for $300. That's friggin' ridiculous. And when you look side by side with, I mean, look, there are some differences. Yeah, there's a lot more contrast to the StrikeEagle, but for $300, less than half the price of this, you can get that Arken and have a pretty damn good looking optic. Not to mention, the EP5 models that are out with Japanese glass are like $600 or less. That's a hell of a compelling argument. Swapping out the Arken for an Athlon, we now move into the Helos BTR Gen II 6-24. This is a little bit more reminiscent of what a 6 should look like. The Arken just seems like it's zoomed in even further. When I first reviewed the Athlon, I really liked it. And thinking back on it, it had a lot of really good features that I personally liked. All the controls felt good, with the exception of the locking elevation turret. Every time I wanted to go disengage that, it felt like I was just going to rip the top off because it was only held on by like a thread and a half and a bronze erector. As you can clearly see, the two of these were filmed on very drastically different days. The Vortex on the left was filmed on a very overcast day. The Athlon on the right was filmed on a very bright sunny morning in the beginning of winter. You're going to have completely different color tones, and as a result, it's going to play around with the camera settings. Unfortunately, I didn't get it perfectly to the point where I was ultimately satisfied when I filmed the Athlon, but we can still take a lot of information from that. Namely, there's a lot of sharpness to those bricks. The image is slightly washed out, but we still have a lot of clarity to the image and enough contrast to be able to pick up which bricks are what. For the so-on $600 that it costs, the Athlon is still a pretty good option. Here is now a comparison that doesn't really make sense. We have an $800 Vortex versus a $3,200 some odd Minox ZP5. These are both 5-25s, and they both basically feature the exact same sort of setup. However, is the Minox worth its extra weight, or does the Vortex punch above its price point? With the illumination on full with the Vortex, you can barely see it during the daytime, but enough of that. Side by side with these two images, what can you take away right away? Well, the first thing you're going to notice is just how much larger the field of view is and the view through the Vortex is as opposed to the Minox. These are both cropped the exact same percentage. That's a huge difference. As far as how the reticles look, they're both basically the exact same sort of DNA. You have a fine center dot and a very good, usable, readable tree. Image quality here at 200 yards, you can make out all the numbers on the black and on the white fairly easily between the two. Even out at 300 yards, yeah, it might not be a perfect one-to-one comparison between the two, but that StrikeEagle performs very well. The Minox is, of course, a little bit sharper, a little bit clearer, maybe even a little bit brighter, but I don't know if it's worth the price point, especially considering if you got to send the Minox back for repair work, you might have to pay a shit ton of money for it. Our last but not least is the ZCO 420. Why a $4,000 optic versus a $7-ish, $800 optic? Because I have footage of it, and I reviewed it, and I love it. That's why. The ZCO is what the Minox wants to be. It wants to be an insanely colored, beautifully crisp, like crunchy, biting into a really perfectly ripe Honeycrisp apple you just picked off the tree. Oh, it's so juicy. The ZCO is one of those optics that I couldn't really afford. Scott wanted $3,000 for it, which is actually cheap compared to what they go for. I was really, really contemplating buying it off of him, selling several different optics for it. Unfortunately, I would have no need for it. Even on a precision rig, it would be so much of an optic that I would feel bad even getting dirt on it. It goes against everything I believe, which is finding the best possible budget optic. The StrikeEagle is much more in line to what I believe is a better optic for most people as well as myself, as opposed to the ZCO, which is just flat out insanely good. Now, moving into my final thoughts, there's going to be a lot of people in the comments saying, oh, well, I bought my StrikeEagle 5-25 by 56 for $400, for $450, for $500. And yes, you are correct. Every once in a while, there will be some places that run them on a really, really good sale. And at that point, I honestly think for the 500-ish price point, this thing punches well above its weight class. At that point, it's only $100, $150 more than its little brother, the Venom. And the Venom doesn't offer illumination or locking turrets. Now, if you're the type of person that's out there questioning whether the Venom would be better for you or the StrikeEagle, it's up to you. Are you ever going to use or need illumination? Yes or no? Do you care about locking turrets? Yes or no? If the answer is maybe or no, go with the Venom, save $150-ish, get better turrets in my opinion, and it's going to be really close when we do the side-by-side, but I think I give the image ever so slightly to the Venom. It's a slightly newer optic with slightly different internals. So as a result, they definitely did something internally to make it a little bit different from the StrikeEagle. However, if you need illumination and you need lock and turrets, this should definitely be on your short list. There are some other options out there. The Athlon and the Arken are just two of them. And that's not all that's out there. You can even get a PST Gen II, another Vortex product, or you can bump it up to even a used Razer HD Gen II. Depending on your choice of reticle and whether you want mils or MOA, I've seen them go for as little as $1,300. That is a lot of optic for the money. It also weighs 15-ish ounces heavier than one of these being this or the Venom, but it's something else to take into consideration. Getting into the real nitty-gritty on this thing, what do we have? Well, starting with the build quality, the overall fit, finish, and feel feels a little chintzy, a little hollow, a little cheap. But that's to be expected. This thing was built to fit in a certain price point and still offer a 34mm tube, a 56mm front objective, and good glass, and good usable controls. I feel Vortex found a really good balance between everything. This is a great departure from a Diamondback tactical. If you've never gotten behind one, they're not worth their money whatsoever. No matter what magnification range you get, they are just absolute foggy messes when you look through it. It's like looking through swamp water. For the money, buy literally anything else other than a Diamondback tactical. This slots itself in right above its little brother, the Venom, like we already talked about. No need to beat a dead horse with that. But this is still cheaper than the PST. Well, I reviewed the 3-15 quite some time ago, and I really, really enjoyed that. But I do have a 5-25 that I just got in for testing, so hopefully I'll be able to do a comparison between the Venom, the StrikeEagle, the PST, and the Razer HD, as well as the Razer LHT. I think that's going to be an awesome HPVO head-to-head competition, sort of, to see what's what between the ultimate hierarchy of the Vortex lineup. I know it probably sounds like I'm shilling for Vortex, but no, I'm not. I just like products that they produce. And this StrikeEagle 5-25x56 is just one of them. I'm not going to say I absolutely love this optic, but as far as it being able to do all of its functions properly and well, it does that. I still prefer the Venom, but your mileage may vary. However, if you think that I'm shilling for Vortex, you're more than welcome to go out there and buy any number of other optics from different manufacturers. The Arken SH4 Gen II that we talked about earlier is one such example. For $300, that is a stupid cheap price for one of those. If you want to double the price, go for the EP5 with Japanese ED glass inside the probably even a better constructed SH4 body. That has the potential to be an absolutely magnificent optic, and one that I hope to get my hands on, either from Arken sending it to me, even though we haven't talked in a while, or me just flat out buying it. Because for under $600, that could be huge. And with all that being said, a huge thank you to my friend Noah for letting me borrow this off his precision rig. I've had probably a couple hundred rounds downrange with this thing at varying distances, and I have to say, I could see why he loves this thing so much. And with that, I hope this video has helped you make a very smart buying decision. Thank you all very much for watching, and as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.